Shane White, and this is The Process. Hey gang, Shane Patrick White here with another edition of The Process. On today's process, I'm doing another ink style. This one's number 9, and we're working in dry brush. Now, to do dry brush, I ended up choosing something that I've wanted for a long time to ink, which was a MARK SCHULTZ drawing of one of his characters from Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Hannah, whatever her last name is, I don't know, I can't remember. But I love drawing dinosaurs and I love drawing pretty girls. But instead of relying on myself to come up with the illustration, I thought, well, this might be a nice treat to kill two birds with one stone. I've wanted to commission MARK SCHULTZ for quite some time to do a drawing for me, but for whatever reason, those stars have never quite aligned. So I ended up printing off a high-resolution pencil page that he had online. With his drawing technique, one of the things that you'll notice if you Google his work is that he has an interesting penciling style. It's more illustrative. It has a lot of values, and if you want to interpret those values like he does, it's going to be more of a dry brush technique. And what he does is more of a split hair technique, which I don't quite know how to cut the brushes to get that look. And I think I've asked him sort of in a roundabout way, but he wasn't really willing to share. Not that he wasn't willing to share, it's just maybe I should have asked him a little more directly. But I said, well, I'm going to try inking in this style and see where it gets me. I thought, well, the best way to render halftone values without a lot of line work is to go in with dry brush. What I did is I started out by printing out the pencil onto a larger, I think it was 13 by 19 sheet of Strathmore 2-ply. And the thing I noticed right away is you have to wipe a lot of the excess ink off your brush. That's why it's good to have a sheet of scrap paper nearby to do that. Usually, like anything else, I always start off on non-critical areas. And this is, again, a way to build up confidence, figure out how the strokes are going to go down, and how best to understand where you're at on any given day. Sometimes you're just not in the mood to ink, and I get that. Sometimes you have to fight through that. You may as well fight into the non-critical areas and get that sorted out real quick. think what's also interesting about inking other people's work is that you learn a lot about the person. You learn about what's important to them. Well, in the case of Mark Schultz, I was seeing a real sensitive person, somebody who really paid attention to details that maybe other people don't really think about. The sensitivity comes through his use of pencil, the way he crafts the shadow forms, the way he captures the facial features. I think those were something that I don't do and that I started to appreciate more and more. I remember inking a friend of mine's work for an issue of Heavy Metal magazine, and he was really particular about hair. And then I became particular about hair. So now when I illustrate pieces, I'm always thinking about how can I make this hair better? And I think that's what's important about maybe inking other people's work or doing even master copies. As you move on in your career in art and you start to decipher other people's work, you start seeing similarities in their struggles. You start seeing how they came about an image or why they chose a line or form or shape. And when you get a better understanding of that, then you can look at their work in a new way. And in that way, you may learn something about that person and maybe a way that you can solve work for yourself or you can solve problems for yourself to make the work better. As you can see from the pencils, the column that the dinosaur creature is on sort of it goes from dark on the top to a little bit lighter on the bottom, but it's all continuous tone. And so how does one go about breaking that up? How does one get that gradation of tone with just a Winsor & Newton Series 7 No. 2 brush and Speedball super black ink? I don't know. And that's the thing I'm thinking about the entire time that I'm working on the two figures. It's like, how am I going to make everything balance out? As I was inking Anna's hair, I also realized that Mark Schultz really likes hair. And he did such a great job penciling it. It really made me think, man, I've got some work to do. Especially if I didn't want to screw it up. So it's like, I wanted to make sure I got the lights and darks balanced just right. I wanted it to feel more open and not so shape-based. So that means that, your edges may have more of the dry brush quality to that. Or you might be able to do that with a line by doubling up your line and making it thinner on the edges. With the anatomy of the brush, there's something to consider. The underside of the brush is going to give you more of that dry effect. The top part of the brush, meaning the part of the brush that is, I guess it's like this. It's like the top part of the brush is going to be where your line, the strong form of your line will be created. The bottom part, closer to the belly when you push down on the actual brush itself, will create a softer edge. And so by keeping that in mind, you can manipulate that edge and you can direct it. And by me spinning the paper around, I'm able to figure out where that soft edge is versus that hard edge is. As you've seen from a lot of my videos, you can get a lot of different looks and feel from just one brush. It just depends on how you manipulate it, how you pull the brush across the page. And in this illustration, I'm trying a lot of different techniques, but I'm still trying to keep a very dry brush feel to it. something else worth noting is, as I was filming this, the heat from the lights that I was using was actually evaporating some of the ink. And ink in itself can come off as being dry. So even though it looks wet, it's thickening up, and it's harder to manipulate and do finer work. So usually towards the end of its lifespan, I'll squirt some Windex into it to thin it out a little bit. I never use water because that will degrade the quality of the carbon black that's suspended in the shellac or whatever base they use to make the ink. And then the whole process starts all over again. So I'll go back to dipping my brush into the ink, using the scrap paper to get rid of some of the excess. And I'm sure you could probably use a paper towel, but paper towel might be a little too generous in terms of sucking the ink right out of the brush. Now, when I take on a new style like this, I tend to want to practice beforehand. And I've done dry brush technique in the past, but I've never inked Mark Schultz's work before. And in doing this piece, unlike earlier ink styles where I'm mimicking somebody else's style, I tend to want to do some research. But for this piece, I didn't. And I don't know if I have a good excuse. I think what I wanted to do was I wanted to go at this with an open mind. I wanted to figure out, am I able to understand who this person is, who illustrated this? Can I have a conversation with his pencils? He says this, can I reinforce it with blackline? In a way, that's how jazz works, you know? The horn section might throw out a few notes and then bass player follows up with something, and maybe that's a little too esoteric, but I think in some ways that's what's great about this, is when you have a collaboration, you get to share in the creation of it, and you get to plus whatever the other person's doing. And that's what's kind of fun about working together with other people. All that being said, I will state that this was hectic. This was one of the hardest pieces I've ever worked on, and I think it was because I wanted it to turn out really well. I didn't want it to suck. I mean, it's one of those things, it's like, I don't know if anyone's ever inked Mark Schultz, and to even think about inking it takes some brass. But I also would agree that no one's going to ink themselves better than Mark Schultz. I mean, I've worked with a few inkers, and to be honest, I really have a harder time to explain myself in pencils to other inkers so that the end product looks good to me. And I don't know if a lot of artists are like that or not. I feel like I can ink myself better than I would expect other people to ink me, but I don't know. I think it's also one of those things too, that the more people ink you, or the more pages they ink or illustrations they ink of your work, the better they're going to get. And that's when it's like forming a band, you know. Eventually you'll find the tempo and the rhythm and get the vibe down. And I just haven't had that opportunity yet. Now we're far enough along in this piece where I'm starting to make some mistakes. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I really do not like using whiteout. My goal ultimately is to find a way to make those mistakes work. And in this piece, I wasn't able to do that. I just I don't know. I should have thought about what I was seeing and then compared it to everything else on the page and figure out how best to solve it. And I thought I had the confidence to figure it out in the moment, but I probably should have done a breakout page. You know, printed another copy of this, tried a few things and see if I could make it work, but ultimately I didn't. I thought, you know, throw all caution to the wind, go for it. And sometimes you screw up, and I did. All that being said, I decided, well, okay, I'm gonna have to use whiteout, and that's just the way it is. And once I sort of released that control, I started having a little more fun. It was kind of odd, actually. I thought, you know, let's try some stuff. At some point, the piece becomes yours, and it's no longer Mark Schultz's piece. And you've got to make decisions that make it feel right for you. You're trying to honor the work. You're trying to convince people the lie that the creator, the penciler has created is true. And you want to suspend disbelief. But you have to find, at some point, that area where you can call it your own, you know, put your foot down and say, okay, this is how I'm solving it. This is what looks best to me. And some people, some artists, some inkers, their ego gets in the way and they disrespect the pencils completely and they make it their own right from the gate. So they bury the person's style. And sometimes that's fine. That's what they get hired to do, but not always. And editors and artists have to work together, and they have to find what is it that's going to work best for the story. Because this is a one-off illustration, a lot's riding on the elements of that illustration. I want to make sure I get it right, and I want to make sure that I get the penciler's intention across to the viewer. So by the time I finished this, I ended up realizing I had too many strokes in here, too many lines, and it was starting to vibrate. So I needed to suture some of these wounds and close the gaps and try to get more focus on the characters. So this is me just trying to save this piece from looking like a complete mess. But hopefully you like the end result, and hopefully you try working in dry brush. It's a lot of fun once you get the hang of it. But do yourself a favor and maybe not try inking Mark Schultz right off the bat. As always, thanks for watching. Hey gang, it's worth noting that I also have a Patreon. I cover a lot of stuff about comics and storytelling, as well as storyboarding and running your own freelance business at www.patreon.com/Shane Patrick White. I have 4 different tiers available for you to check out today. If you've ever had the desire to start your own art business, this is the Patreon for you at www.patreon.com/Shane Patrick White. As always, thanks for watching. And also, don't forget to subscribe to The Process. And please, if you have more questions, feel free to leave a comment below.